Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to host this panel with the RADXX Award winners. During today's webinar, the panelists are going to cover a wide range of topics ranging from the importance of advocacy and mentoring to emotional intelligence, work-life balance, and supporting parents in the workplace. So before we get started, I just wanted to highlight a few quick details. If you have any questions during today's presentation, you can send them to us in the questions box. We will be answering questions at the end of the webinar. Of course, if we don't get to yours, we'll be sure to reach back out after the presentation. We're also recording today's session, and we'll be sending out the recording and the slides for today's presentation after the webinar as well. So let's go ahead and get started then. Hi everyone, my name is Catherine Slotnick, and I'm Ombra Health's Senior Marketing Manager. For those unfamiliar with Ombra, we're a cloud medical image management platform. And as their marketing manager, I primarily focus on creating and sharing thought leadership content in the radiology and informatics space. Ombra sponsors RADXX, and I really enjoy working with the RADXX steering committee on the website and their initiatives on a regular basis. I'm very excited to be joined today by the panel and my co-moderator, Cheryl Carey.
Thank you, Catherine. As introduced, I am Cheryl Carey, Executive Director for the Society of Imaging Informatics and Medicine. 3 things to know about me. I enjoy creating innovative cultures. Secondly, I am energized when transforming talent into teams, so that whole leadership development area. And thirdly, I've been dubbed the governance geek. I enjoy working on the infrastructure, that invisible, the policies and procedures, helping volunteers and staff know what's expected of them when the role, what their assigned role is. And that probably comes from my 25-ish years as an association executive running nonprofits. I will also mention I am a mom. If you follow me on Twitter, you've probably seen a tweet or two about my son, who is a 4th-year collegiate soccer player, recently was awarded All-American honors for his soccer season. But more importantly, I share that because I do understand being employed and juggling that with family life. And lastly, I will mention that last week was my 1-year anniversary with SIIM. Very excited to be a part of this community. Have loved working with the SIIM staff and SIIM board in this imaging informatics space. So thank you for inviting me to be co-moderator today. And with that, we'll get to know our panelist. Laura, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Laura Coombs. I'm the Senior Director of Informatics at the ACR, and so that includes our recently launched Data Science Institute, which has taken up a lot of our time, which is kind of geared at bringing AI into the radiology workplace and making it more useful to them.
Great, thanks, Laura. Nina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am, since Cheryl mentioned, I am also a mother of 2, and I'm a practicing radiologist. I have been working in emergency radiology for the past 13 years. I've got a background in applied mathematics, so before I went into medicine, I actually was going into mathematics and optimization theory. And so with that, my interests are really in using information technology to help make it easier for us to take better care of our patients and to better serve our referring clinicians. I have been working at Radiology Partners for 6 years now, and Radiology Partners is a national radiology practice here in the US.
Great, thank you. And then we have our RADXX star, Dr. Lindsey Shea.
Hi everyone, I am a 4th-year resident, 3rd year in radiology at Indiana University, going into pediatric radiology, and I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And we did want to give a quick shout out to our RADXX advocate, Dr. Nabil Safdar. He unfortunately couldn't join us today, but we want to highlight all the great work he's done mentoring and sponsoring women in their careers as well. So a little bit about RADXX for anyone that's unfamiliar. So RADXX, or Rad Women, is a group that fosters networking and mentorship opportunities for women leaders in radiology, informatics, and IT management. RADXX was co-founded a few years ago now by Dr. Geraldine McGinty, the current chair of the ACR Board of Chancellors and leaders in the informatics space, and sponsored by Ombra Health. RadXX really came up because Dr. McGinty found in a lot of her conversations that she felt, whether it was on webinar panels, educational sessions, conferences, that she was frequently the only woman in the room, and many others agreed with her. In fact, today, the ACR Commission on Human Resources Workforce Survey demonstrates that only about 21% of practicing radiologists in the United States are women. And what's interesting about that percentage is it really hasn't changed over the past few decades. So today we're excited to hear a little bit from our panelists about that and perhaps get why that number has remained steady. So since the founding, the core team has been joined by many other great leaders, including Dr. Nina Kottler, Dr. Amy Kutsenis, Dr. Tessa Cook, Dr. Amy Patel, and over 150 individuals who are really interested in increasing diversity within the various disciplines related to medical imaging. A couple ways you can get involved here. If you head to the RadXX website, you can subscribe to the monthly newsletter. We have regular tweet chats. You can follow along on Twitter, just hashtag RadXX to hear about the latest tweet chats. And our resource library has articles shared by quite a few of our members, so we really encourage you to check those out. And a few exciting recent numbers. So at our second annual Cocktails for Change event at RSNA, where we announced the RadXX Award winners, we had over 250 guests. We had over 4.5 million impressions during our last tweet chat, and today there are over 500 newsletter subscribers. So it's been really, really incredible to see the movement take off over the last few years. So with that, let's jump into our panel. So our first section is on mentoring and advocacy. So question 1 asks, how do you define the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, and do you think it's important to have both? So this question really stemmed from an article that was shared on the RadXX site. At AAWR in 2018, Dr. Sherry Cannon highlighted the need for both mentors and sponsors, with a note that having a sponsor can actually be more impactful than having a mentor, kind of defining the fact that a sponsor is someone who's really willing to put their credibility on the line for you. So we'll start with Lindsey on this one. Lindsey, would you say you agree that there's a difference between mentors and sponsors, and why do you think it's important to have both?
Yeah, I would love to. So I kind of think of a mentor as being somebody who's helping you kind of focus on your current career development, what sort of projects you might want to do. They kind of help you out as more of a partner. A sponsor is somebody who's helping you think about where you want to go in your career and nominating you for things that would help you get on your way. So the person who serves as my sponsor is actually who nominated me for this award. I think a lot of us hear it and don't necessarily want to believe that it's true. It's not what you know, but who you know. And I think that a sponsor is kind of along those lines. So it can definitely be helpful to have both.
That's fantastic. That's really cool. I'm sorry, was that Lindsey again? Lindsey, did you have another comment to add, or was that Nina?
No, I do not.
Okay. Nina, do you have any thoughts about mentors versus sponsors?
Yeah, sure. I really agree with Lindsey. I think they're very different. I think of it in a very simplistic way. If you want to kind of summarize it all into one sentence, I would say that a mentor talks with you and an advocate or sponsor talks about you. And they're both really important. So I think, like Lindsey said, a mentor is really someone that's providing you guidance for your career. It's usually someone that is very experienced in the field and someone who you've developed a relationship with. So it's not a stranger that you go up to and say, hey, you're really high in your field, can you mentor me? It's really a social relationship. And a sponsor is a senior leader, usually in your practice or in your area of expertise, that works directly with you, that uses their influence to endorse you for advancement. And I think they're both really important. There's been a lot of articles that are published that say the number one reason why people say they get ahead in their career is because someone, whether it's a mentor or a sponsor, helped them out. And so I since they're both very different, I think that they're both really valuable.
That's great. And I think we've seen a lot in our RadXX tweet chats as well, with people on Twitter sharing who their mentors and sponsors are, and really agreeing with that key difference and that you need both in your careers.
Mm-hmm.
So this brings us to question 2.
Yes, and building on that, Lindsey, talk to us about a top tip that you have for a successful sponsor or mentor relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So the one thing that I've been talking about a little bit with my sponsor, he says that I seize opportunities, and that's something that he really appreciates. So somebody might put you up for something. If you back out on it, then it's going to reflect poorly on them for having advocated for you and nominated for you. So if you ask for somebody to sponsor you or mentor you, make sure that you follow through on whatever opportunities they're able to present you with.
Mm-hmm. Nina, did you want to add to that? Any top tips?
Sure, I really agree with Lindsey. I think that standing out, standing out, of course, in a good way is really important. And maybe a lot of people don't really know how to do that. Like, how do you sort of stand out without trying to be too loud or stand out in a negative way? And I think that it's kind of something that I learned in medical school in my surgical rotation, where no one's really telling you, hey, here's what you have to do to be really good and do a great job in this rotation. You kind of have to figure it out. If you're not a physician or didn't go to medical school, you can kind of think about it in musical terms. So if you are playing a chord, you're just learning how to play music, you play your first chord, you're all excited, you got that chord done. The people who are going to do really well are not the ones that are just saying, great, I did that chord, and then trying to think later about the next chord. The people that are going to succeed are the ones that are thinking ahead and saying, all right, I'm getting this chord, but what's the next one that I have to do? And I think those are people that really can stand out, because frankly, a mentor and a sponsor is someone that has to choose you. So you do want to stand out. I have one suggestion too for sponsors, because I think we need a lot more of them. And so if you're going to be a sponsor, my suggestions would be 2 things. One, you really need to get to know the person you're working with. You're never going to be able to help them unless you know who they are and you know how you can help them out. And then the second one, as a sponsor or a mentor, is really to tell your story. I think most importantly in that is to share your failures. We all have them. I think there's this idea that successful people are successful because who they are today, but that's really not the case. Who we are today is because of our many years of previous life and work experience, and that includes all of our failures that have brought us to where we are. And so I think it's really important to sort of correct the illusion that any kind of success is magical or requires some kind of superhuman abilities, because it really doesn't. It just requires work and time and persistence.
That's great. Thank you. Laura, as you reflect on 2018, what were you most proud of, and how did you advance your career or help someone in theirs?
Yeah, so this is interesting because 2018 was really the first full year of our since we launched the Data Science Institute. So we were really ramping up over the course of the last year, and so I was really excited. And it was a total team effort. But that in October we actually released our first set of use cases for artificial intelligence, and so there was a lot of work into planning that, as well as pushing along a number of pilots. It was a really busy year, and as part of ramping up, part of that was hiring. We hired about 6 new people. So I did have the opportunity to help, kind of mentor along some of them, were just starting, and people in various stages. But just kind of to echo what both Lindsey and Nina were saying, I think one of the important things is to seize on opportunities. So I was able to offer some of these new hires many opportunities. Like, some of them didn't have much experience with AI, but we just said, hey, go experiment, go take these online courses, go do this stuff. And some of them seized the opportunity and just really learned a lot very quickly, and we were able to push them into more technical skills and more areas that they wanted to grow in. And so I think whereas on the other hand, if sometimes people tend to sit back and say, well, can you give me something to do, or can you change my title to be such and such so that I can do such and such? And I think the people who really exceed are the ones who, like Nina and Lindsey were saying, who stand out and who seize the opportunities that are presented to them. So that was very exciting for me over the course of the year to see people grow in this area.
And Laura, we'll stay with you for this question as well. Are you planning on taking or teaching any imaging IT specialty training courses in 2019?
Yeah, so great question. So I have not actually figured out what I'm going to take yet, but what I do know is that SIIM and RSNA and other organizations offer really good, but especially those two I know about, offer really good learning sessions at their conferences. So every time I go to those conferences, I look up, okay, what are some of the learning activities here, and they have a lot of hands-on activities. There's RSNA, there's the Learning Lab, but SIIM offers various workshops, and so I totally recommend that people look into those, and there's other courses too, but there's so much educational material out there now, and I know that a lot of residences are now starting to have some informatics programs, and so there's just a lot out there. But I definitely, before I go to those conferences, will check out what's available.
And for anyone in our audience, we always love sharing any suggested training courses on the RadXX site, so please feel free to send those our way. We would love to share them. So this brings us to section 2, women in radiology and informatics. So question 1 focuses on residency. How can radiology resident programs draw more women? Why do you believe fewer women than men are interested in the field? And there was a study that was shared on the RadXX site. I believe it was from Duke University Medical Center. And in an anonymous survey, they found that one of the highest scoring factors for residency were dedicated exposure and mentoring to a certain specialty. So Lindsey, we'll start with you for this question. Do you think those were factors that influenced you in your decision to become a radiology resident?
I think those are absolutely factors that influenced me in the decision that I made for the department that I ended up joining. We actually have a really strong women in radiology group here, so I think a lot of us are very fortunate that women are well represented in our group, and the ones who are present tend to work together a lot. We were actually invited to give a talk at 2018 ARRS, and from some of the research that we did into that, it's really about the optics. So what you see matters. I think a lot of people don't necessarily see females in radiology, and so they don't think of females being associated with radiology. There were some similar phenomena that were demonstrated for OB-GYN, for example. Men don't tend to see men in OB-GYN, and so that field has tended to stay predominated by women. So those were some of the things that we had found.
Yeah, I think that certainly makes a lot of sense, and it applies to fields outside of radiology and informatics as well, that people typically look for mentors and optics, as you said.
So moving on to the next question, why do you believe that having diverse voices at the table improves outcomes for everyone? Have you ever been in a situation where you felt more diverse perspectives were needed, and how did you handle voicing your opinion? And so, we'll start with you, but while you're thinking, just wanted to share that according to a Forbes study of 321 executives that were in companies grossing $500 million or more annually, one of the key findings was that diversity is a key driver of innovation and is a critical component of being successful on a global scale. So, Nina, tell us why you believe that having a diverse voices at the table improves outcomes for everyone.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, I think we all recognize that we really live in a very global society. We've got a mixture of gender and culture, religion, sexual orientation, and all kinds of things. And it's been well documented that diversity in the workplace in all of these areas really improves performance. It increases creativity, it drives innovation, and it even improves employee satisfaction. It's really diversity. You could think about it. It's basically a competitive advantage, right? Groups with greater diversity are going to be able to outcompete those that don't. And it's kind of unfortunate in radiology that we haven't taken good advantage of those benefits. Certainly women in radiology are and have been for a very long time underrepresented, and this hasn't changed much for the past 30 years. I think this lack of diversity is even more evident when you get up to more senior leadership positions. There's this great article I read in Radiographics. It was an October issue that talked about it. And they mentioned some statistics. So women represent almost half of the people in medical school, but only a quarter of the radiology residents and a fifth of the practicing radiologists. And if you look at leaders in radiology, only 13% of those are actually women. And so you talked about Geraldine saying that often she was the only female in the room. And I think many of us on this panel have been in the same place. I mean, I've been in that because I was in mathematics before, which is similarly not a lot of women, and radiology is not a lot of women. And I think that it's more often the norm than the exception, that we are the only one in the room and we don't have that diversity. I think in terms of what I've tried to do about it, I try to do more with actions. I think mentoring and sponsoring people are really important, and that's really important to me. And I've also joined groups like RadXX to provide education and bring light to this disparity, because I think really recognizing it is the first step in being able to make a change.
That's excellent. I like your point too about the competitive advantage. That's good. Laura, tell us your thoughts on the question.
Yeah, so just from a little different slant, one of the places where I've seen this is, for the Data Science Institute, we develop these panels to come up with the use cases of, that are important, where AI might be helpful. But one of the jobs of the panel is to come up with sources of variability of things that might make the algorithm break. And so you've all heard about these AI algorithms that have come out that have been, racially biased, or that was, I think, it was in the criminal justice system. That was that one. But there's all kinds of examples of where these AI algorithms break and sometimes contain unintended biases. And so as we develop these panels, as they come up, as they have to think about things, sometimes it's just for image interpretation. It might be something like, okay, so if there was one example of they were looking at segmenting kidneys, and when they ran it through enlarged kidneys, which they didn't have in their sample, then it segmented it all, incorrectly. And so just, sometimes our panel members have to think about things that could happen that could cause the algorithm to be biased. And this is both for image interpretation and non-interpretive AI algorithms. And so having a panel that is diverse is so much more helpful in trying to think about things that will make it break, because if you just have, your panel is very homogeneous, they may not think of things that, are going to end up causing bias to the algorithm. So that's somewhere where I think that we've seen the importance of diversity.
I know there were even some recent articles about how in the development of Apple's healthcare app, that there weren't enough women represented, so they actually had issues developing the app fully in aspects of women's health for that reason. So certainly having diverse voices at the table is really best for everyone.
Absolutely.
So this brings us to question 3, which is about leadership positions specifically. So as women seek leadership positions in radiology, they often still encounter roadblocks. How can a woman break through the glass, or in this case, rad ceiling? And we're going to discuss work and life balance a lot more in the next section, but I did want to highlight that a lot of our RadXX members have shared articles with us on how women still often face a greater burden than men when it comes to caring for children or elderly relatives. It's not always the case, but it still more frequently falls on women's shoulders. Do you think that the time commitment associated with those factors is also a potential roadblock? So Nina, we'll start with you for this one.
Thanks, Catherine. You mentioned before that there was an article that talked about how sponsorship was more important than mentorship. And I was looking at this Harvard Business Review. It was from like 2010, a report. And it said that one reason why so few women hold the really top business positions is that they are under-sponsored. And part of that is because women don't feel like they want to be seen using connections. And I've always kind of felt like that. I'm like, I feel like I should be judged based on my accomplishments and not who I know or who's necessarily advocating for me. But I think we need to have that. I think it's really important. And so a few things. One, be an advocate, have advocates. I think it's really important for us to break through that ceiling. Two, I think we need more role models. So like Lindsey was talking about in residency, if you don't see a lot of people going into radiology, you're not going to do it. You know, we all tend to go into what we see with people that are like us. And so if you are a woman or even a man that is in a position of power or in any position in radiology, I think there's a few things we can do. One would be validation. If a woman in a room is saying something and you agree with it, validate their statement. That adds a lot of power to what the woman is saying. The second thing I would say is really inclusion. So when you are in a group and maybe women aren't as vocal as their male colleagues, which can happen, then include those, ask for people's opinions. And then the third one would be advocacy. I think we, men and women just have sort of different underlying behaviors. And was it Sheryl Sandberg in her Lean In book talked about how a woman will only apply for a position if they're 100% qualified, and a man might apply for it if they're like 10% qualified. So, so be an advocate for those women who are really qualified, but maybe not be speaking up for themselves about positions.
That's great, and that leads us into our next question regarding being the only woman in a meeting. Did that affect the way you acted? So Cheryl, I'm going to hand it over to you on this one.
Yes, thank you. So the question, have you ever been the only woman in the room during a meeting? How did that affect the way you acted? And did you feel pressured to act in a certain way? And Laura, we'll look to you, but while you're thinking, one of our RADXX steering committee members, Dr. Amy Patel, highlighted how, as the first female chief in an all-male program, she did feel that pressure to constantly walk the line between being too timid or too assertive. So Laura, tell us your thoughts on this.
Okay, well, the example that I thought of was I at the ACR, I started off in quality and safety, and I was heading up the registry effort. And quality and safety, it turns out at ACR, is a predominantly female, dominated department. And I ended up, about 5 or 6 years ago, moving over to IT and informatics, and it was predominantly male. And like one of the first things I noticed is that there was a lot more food in the quality and safety department. People were having parties and bringing things in all the time, but that was just sort of, I don't know, something I noticed. But the other thing is that I started having meetings where in the meeting I would be the only female. And what I found was, I don't think there's anything anybody did, but I just found myself more hesitant to speak up. And the way that I got over it was, number one, because having not been from an informatics background, I really wasn't as confident about my skills in that area or my competency. And so over time, I gained skills and competency, and so I felt better about speaking up. And the other thing is that I'm happy to say this department has become, much more diverse, much more females represented, and that made me think also that on the first informatics commission meeting I was at, I was looking around and like realized, wow, I'm the only female here, and that means all, not only staff, but all of the radiologists, there was no female representation. So I'm happy that now people like Nina are now part of the Informatics Commission, and that Geraldine has really made this push. And having Geraldine speak up about, we need more diversification has made it easier for me to speak up and to try to find people who are, more diverse. So I think it's been a positive movement.
Great. And Lindsey, we want to hear from you next. But before that, just want to share that in Dr. Sherry Cannon's session at AAWR 18 that Catherine referenced earlier, she discussed a difference in the way men and women approach board meetings. Men will cover important points and do the legwork necessary to ensure support from attendees before the meeting. So what happens in the boardroom usually goes as expected. On the other hand, women use the time in the same room to discuss key issues, hoping to drive the group to an intended decision. Lindsey, tell us your experience in this space of maybe being the only woman and how you handled that.
Well, that's an interesting talk, first of all, Cheryl, so thank you for sharing that. I really liked what Nina said in response to the last question. I forget what it was now, but I remember that I liked it. So I think a good example for me of being the only woman in the room during a meeting would be how I acted during my residency interviews versus my fellowship interviews that I just completed. Going into the residency interviews, I didn't want to be perceived differently for being a female, so I really tried to be more or less androgynous as much as I could, try and think more like a male or act more like a male, and I think that hinders who you are, and that hinders the ability to bring that diversity to organizations, which, as we discussed, can be a positive thing. So in going to the fellowship interviews, I was more myself and didn't worry about trying to cater things. And I think that's one of the things that women can be afraid of when they're applying for jobs, is that they might need to mask certain things in order to be considered for the position. And so what Nina had said was that women are much less likely to apply for a job unless they're 100% qualified. I think we tend to do that as far as our self-representation goes too. But at the end of the day, if I am somebody who wants to have a family, then being upfront about that, even though it's an illegal question for employers to ask, being upfront about that makes it more likely that I end up in an organization that will be accommodating and helpful for that.
Thank you, Lindsey. And that kind of perfectly leads us to our next section, which is on work-life balance. So our first question is, how do you balance family life while traveling to conferences and educational sessions? And there's been a lot of research on this topic. A study by the National Academy of Sciences found that the primary caretakers of children tend to face a lot of hurdles when it comes to attending and participating in conference activities due to things like breastfeeding, pregnancy, and caretaking. And oftentimes what they called the baby penalty more negatively affected women than men, and even more so women of color. So we'll start with Nina for this one. How do you balance family life while traveling to conferences and sessions? And do you think that, women particularly have certain pressures as mothers and parents and wives that can even make this more challenging?
Right. And I think I probably need to read up more on this, because I've tried very unsuccessfully to balance my life at conferences. And every time I've done it, I've really just failed. And so for me, just when you're at a conference, I just feel like the time is not my own. I can't plan ahead. If I try to have my family there and I say, all right, we're going to, meet up for dinner or we'll have lunch together, it never ends up happening. And I think the schedules are just crazy at conferences. They run from 7 in the morning to 10 at night, and you're there the whole day. So I've actually personally stopped trying and failing to keep the two together and try and do both at once. And I've separated my work life in conferences from my family life. And then what I do is when I am with my family, that smaller amount of time that I can be with them, I just dedicate with them. And I find that it's more valuable if I'm really with my family at the time that I can be, than spending a larger portion of my time when I'm trying to split myself. Now, what you said about if you are pregnant or breastfeeding, or you are the primary caretaker and you don't have a choice, that makes it so much harder. And I think it's really important that conferences allow the facilities for people to be able to do that, because we don't want to lose people who are fantastic people in our industry from being able to participate just because they can't because of other situations. I think Geraldine was the first person that brought childcare to the last ACR meeting. And so it's things like that that really are going to help propel us forward in this area, because not everyone is as lucky as me in that way, that I have a significant other, my husband, who is able to do the childcare when I'm not away. And so we need to be able to provide those services for others.
Great, thank you, Nina. And I think that was a really honest answer regarding that it's hard to balance everything perfectly. And the more support that can be given to women in these situations, the better. Laura, do you have any additional thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think my situation was somewhat similar to Nina's in that, so my husband and I didn't tend to have to go to the same conferences. I can remember once where we did, the thing like Tessa talked about where we handed the baby back and forth. That happened once early on. I'm now kind of I just recently in the last year become an empty nester, so I don't have this issues anymore. But when I did, my husband and I kind of had the rule that basically we would try to not travel at the same time, so that he would be home and I was away, and I would be home and he was away, and that worked okay as far as, when you went to the conference, you could be there and your family was home, but it didn't keep you from feeling guilty about it. And, there was, no situation is really ideal. And I think it is difficult. So at the time there was no such thing as childcare or lactation rooms. And I really think that those are great advances that I hope we can promote that more and more, and that'll give people some flexibility.
And I think that brings us perfectly to question 2.
Right. So what unique challenges do mothers face in the field of radiology and informatics? And this year at RSNA 18 had the private breastfeeding boost. Do you think more conferences are offering these accommodations to encourage more women to attend? Lindsey, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. I think it's great that they had the private breastfeeding booths at RSNA, and I think part of that is just to increase the visibility of the fact that people do feel it's an important issue, and they're trying to accommodate so that we don't handcuff people who are attempting to have both a family life and a career at the same time. I think some of the issues that mothers would face in radiology and informatics is just stemming from the fact that there are so few females in radiology and informatics to start with, that a woman being a mother during that time is going to be even less well represented in the general population. And so people get most of their information from stereotypes or other such things that they've heard. So having organizations like RSNA, which is by far the biggest meeting that we have, being willing to have these breastfeeding booths out, I think is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Right. Laura, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think Lindsey said it well, and I think we have to create awareness around this issue that these are needed, because I don't think some people just even myself, who having been out of the it's been couple decades since I was breastfeeding, I kind of forget that that's an issue. And then I saw some of these breastfeeding rooms and I thought, wow, what a great idea. I wish they had that. So I think just promoting awareness and trying to, I thought about it. Hey, is the ACR, does the ACR have a lactation room, after I was reading these questions? And it turns out, yeah, we do have a place you can go. But I think it's one of those things. It's just, we just need to keep encouraging that type of thing.
And I know there was a discussion at the AAWR Women's Caucus on paternal and maternity leave, and the discussion became pretty complex about the nuances of it. But at the end of the day, what the biggest takeaway was that departments and institutions will lose talented women and men if they do not provide strong support for parental leave. And that could also, as some of you have said, negatively impact a woman choosing to pursue a career in radiology and informatics. So Lindsey, we'll start with you for this question. Do you think more women are choosing jobs at facilities that provide not only supportive programs for parents, but just a better work-life balance in general?
I think this is a great question, Catherine, so thank you. I think I am a millennial as much as I wish that I was not. And in my generation, I feel like a lot of us have come up being told that we can do anything and we can have it all. I really liked 30 Rock, and that was another one of the themes that they had on there, where Liz Lemon was constantly trying to have everything and balance things as poorly as it may have worked. So I think that's something that everybody really wants. You want to be able to be excellent at your job. You want to be able to have a great family. Nobody wants to do poorly in either sphere. So I think people would try to get positions that are going to accommodate having success in both.
I think that's very true. And what about you, Nina? Do you have any thoughts on this question?
Yes, I mean, gosh, we're all overachievers, and wouldn't we want to do great at everything we do? And that's what makes us good at what we're doing. And so I think it's really important to make sure that groups have the facilities that are needed, because women do have some unique needs in the workplace, whether it's related to maternity or lactation. Childcare tends to be something that's now more often shared, but can be more on the woman. And if that's the case, and if you want to be competitive in the industry, especially these days in the job market the way it is, where candidates are going to get multiple job offers, I think it really is important to make sure that you are taking care of everyone. And we all want that diversity. We've all seen that it offers that competitive advantage. So I think it's important, even if we're being selfish about it and saying, hey, we want the best practice we can. Those are things that we should be providing. And I think it's natural for people to go into a place where they feel the most welcome and supported. And so if your practice is providing that environment, then a woman is going to more likely go into that. I think the other important part is not just having the policy and the facilities. I think it's really important to have the culture that's supporting it. So who cares if you have a policy that allows for 6 weeks of maternity if there's this negative association with anyone who uses it? That doesn't really work very well. So I think it's a combination of having the policy, but also having the culture that just makes it a positive experience and a good place to go. I think there are a few other things that people can do. They're finding that more people are looking for part-time opportunities, and out of those people, a lot more of them are women. There's about 30% of the workforce that are women that are looking for part-time opportunities, as opposed to 10% male. So if you do have a position that offers some part-time opportunities, you can get more women potentially in those positions. Maternity leave, childcare, lactation facilities, we already discussed. Sometimes doing things like having staggered shifts. In my practice, I work in the part of the department where we do after-hours imaging. And so we have an evening shift, a swing shift, and an overnight shift. And it's really different people that are interested in those. And by having all of that options, all of those options, we're able to attract sort of a larger group of people. But I go back always to the culture. And I think that you really have to make sure that in your practice, there is a culture of acceptance about these things.
Thanks, Nina. Those were some really fantastic insights. And since we do have some extra time here, Laura, would you like to chime in on this question as well?
No, I mean, I would just like to, to second what both Lindsey and Nina said. I think that that it's important choosing, making sure that we have options available and that we're flexible, and that the more we can do that, the more, people are going to be attracted to our positions.
Thank you, everyone. So now we have some time for questions and answers. So I'm going to take a quick look at some of the questions that have come in. So this one is for you, Nina. What are 3 takeaways that we can start today to help each other obtain leadership roles?
3 takeaways that we can start today to help us do leadership roles. Okay, great question, because we need to start taking action, right? We've all identified that there's a problem, but the next thing is, what do you do to help rectify that? And I think one of the things that we've talked about is be a sponsor for other women. You don't have to be a woman to be a sponsor. You can be a man to be a sponsor as well. And I think Lindsey talked about a sponsor that she had, and it sounds like it's a man. And I think it's important to do that, because that is what's going to sort of break through that ceiling. The second one is just sort of be out there. I think I've always been really internally facing in everything I've done in my career in the past. I've been in radiology for a long time now, and most of that has been spent sort of within my own practice. And I think it's important to be more externally facing. Laura's doing a great job at that at the ACR, just making sure you're the person that's out there so that other people see women in positions and it motivates them to be a part of it. And then validation as well. If you are someone that hears a woman speaking about something, there's definitely been research out there that shows if you validate what they say, it provides much more weight to it. And a man, a woman, anyone can do this. But if a woman is saying something in a meeting that you all agree with, validate what they're saying. And that will provide more weight to them. And I think all of these things together are really going to help in taking those next steps to move things forward.
Those are great. And I love the validation in a meeting. That's such a simple, easy thing that anyone can do. I think a lot of us don't even realize the very simple things that can be done to really advocate for each other on a regular basis. Another great question here. Someone said, my experience is women leaders delegate less and tend to put more of the burden on themselves. So thoughts, do you agree? And if so, how can we kind of encourage women to better delegate to others instead of just putting all of the burden on themselves? Laura, do you want to take this one?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I think that's something that, we had a session here at ACR on delegating, and I think delegating is, it's very difficult because we tend to want control, and we want to do it right, and we feel like, oh, if it's going to be done right, I have to do it myself. So I would agree with that. I think that trying to delegate so that we and not delegate so that we can do the things that are most important to us and that we're most interested in and that will help promote our careers. I think I would agree with that statement.
That's great. And another question just came in, Lindsey. I think this would be perfect for you. What advice do you have for residents without informatics experience who want to be more involved with AI?
That is an awesome question. I would love to answer that. So first of all, we have Tessa Cook that we have mentioned multiple times. She and several others, including Nabil Safdar, who was our advocate winner this year. They and a lot of the heavy hitters in AI and informatics have brought together a course that's taught every year in October and in January. I'm pretty sure it's a flat fee for a residency program, and all of the residents in the program would have access to material. But it's a great introduction to all of imaging informatics. Other things that you can do are start looking for webinars like this. RSNA has some that they've started. We have an ACR AI journal club that we do about every month. There are things out there, just start looking. And once you start looking, you'll find things you're interested in, and you can kind of follow the rabbit hole from there.
Thank you, Lindsey. Those are some great tips. So I think this is a question probably for me. Is there a RadixX chat room? And there isn't currently, but for 2019, we're actually looking at ways that RadixX members can start to chat with each other more frequently. So stay tuned, and we'd love any suggestions that you might have regarding forums or chat rooms for the group. Let's see. Looks like another question here. This is a great one. What's your advice to overcome the prove it again syndrome where women seemingly have to repeatedly demonstrate their expertise to be heard or better respected in the workplace? This is more so difficult in those scenarios where one is the only female in the room with no support or co-validating. So Nina, we'll bring it back to you for this one. So again, basically the concept is, especially if you're the only female in the room, how do you handle situations where you really feel like you have to repeatedly demonstrate your expertise just to be better heard?
I think that's a really tough question, and it's a tough situation. And if you don't have that second person in the room to kind of validate you, then yes, you can lose your voice. One of the important things I would say is to not let that stop you from speaking. I think if people sort of feel like they're not heard, then over time they're going to be quieter and quieter. And I think you mentioned that has happened to you in the past. And I think we need to just stay strong and keep speaking up. I do feel like eventually that actions speak louder than words, and that our actions will have an effect. And if we just keep at it. The other thing that I would suggest is to find someone on that team that you can really work with and communicate with, because sometimes it's harder in a big group. But if you can find one person that you can really work with, that you can speak with, and that understands you, they can kind of help be your advocate. And you only need one person. You just need one other voice to be there. Then they can really assist you with that. Otherwise, I would say that maybe it's a good idea to speak about it with the person who is in charge, and just say, listen, I've been noticing that this has been happening in our practice, and I want to be able to make sure that we're able to hear everyone's opinions and everyone's voices. And what is it that I can do to better assist that? Sort of be part of the solution, bring it to light, because maybe it's not even noticed. And I think if we try to sort of suggest at what's happening, but not really bring it to actual light and talk about it directly, then we're not going to get as far. So I think I wouldn't be afraid of actually mentioning it. You don't do it in a big group necessarily, but do it with the person that's in charge. See if that can make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, especially the fact that sometimes it's really not even noticed. And as soon as you say something, you can highlight that and someone else can advocate for you and try to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So let's see. So this is an interesting one. So recently, we've actually had some complaints about RadXX. And is it a situation of favoring gender over skill or experience? Is that something that you've heard, and how do you kind of address concerns like that? And we can go to Laura for this one.
Oh, that's funny, because it's interesting, because I've had a little bit of this discussion with my kids, because I kind of sometimes I feel like, well, it's better if we don't bring up gender at all, because then we'll all be treated equally, or whatever subgroup it is. Let's just treat everybody equally, and not say, hey, let's pay attention to this group or that group, and make sure and it was actually my son who said, well, but mom, if we did that, then there's these disparities that nothing would ever change. And I thought about it, and I'm like, it really is true. If you don't make an effort to make sure that you're not being biased, or not you're ignoring certain groups, then they'll continue to be ignored or treated in a different way. So I feel like it's important to bring these issues to light so that people are aware of them and can start to make change.
I think that's a great answer. And it sounds like just keeping the dialogue open about these issues and talking about them and how people feel about these groups is really great. So let's see another one, and Lindsey, we can go to you for this one. This one is on asking for a raise, which I think there are quite a few articles on the RadXX site and in general about this topic, that women often feel kind of uncomfortable asking for a raise or asking for a job position. Any tips or tricks that you'd like to share on this one?
I wish that I had the breadth of expertise to be able to answer this question well. I know that the work that I was doing with Epic that ended up getting me this award, that was a position that I made up and just asked if I would be able to do, and somehow managed to get people to fund for a little bit. But I think probably Nina or Laura are going to be able to better answer this question, since they've had a career so far.
Sure. Amy, do you want to take this one?
Sure, I can talk about it. It's interesting because I naturally I'm not the kind of person that's going to go out there and again try and self-advocate in a lot of ways. It's not my natural tendency, because I always think actions speak louder than words. But in speaking with a lot of my male colleagues and hearing what they would do in my position or in their position, it's so very different. And I'm always amazed by that. And so I like to just gather other people's recommendations and see, hey, what would you do in my position? And when I hear their answers, it really motivates me to maybe change the way that I'm thinking. So that's number one. So don't be afraid to ask and bring it up and discuss it, because even though it may not be in your nature, like it's not in my nature, it is really important, and others are doing it. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're a climber, or it just means that you're advocating for yourself, and that's a good thing. The second thing I would mention is bring data. Data is not emotional. You can't really argue with data if the data is accurate and there is information that shows other people are being paid more than you and you can get access to that. That's a really strong indicator. And then I think the other thing would be to bring up all the things that you're doing, because your boss or whoever is making these decisions may not be aware of all of the things that you're doing. So make sure that they're aware. And those will all be things that will help you.
I think those are really great suggestions. Laura, anything to add there?
I don't think I have anything to add, but I was just kind of taking notes on what Nina said. I thought it was a really great answer. And I really like the idea about bringing data, because if I think about what's convinced me the most, it's, somebody who's come to me. I've had people, people who work for me come to me and say, I've done this, and this, and just exactly what she said, where they had the data to show their point, and it's very convincing, and like she says, not emotional. So I think that was a great point.
And I think we just have time for maybe about one more question. So I saw one in here when someone said that sometimes, essentially, women can be their own worst critics and sometimes even be the most show the most resistance to work-life balance and good maternity leave in regards to even other women. Have you ever found sometimes that other women, can cause some of these conflicts in the workplace? Nina, we can go back to you for that one.
Yes, I have not personally experienced it, but I have heard a lot of stories from other people about how that's the case, that a woman doesn't want to be an advocate for another woman because she thinks that that's going to endanger her position. And I think it's a horrible thing to do and a really bad way to think about things. I always feel like in my position, I should make myself redundant. Bring up people who can do everything that I can do and better. That's going to make us better as a group. And I think we have to be much more open-minded. We can't just be thinking about the immediate and the now and be selfish and thinking about our own positions. We have to be thinking about bringing up the Lindseys and all of the other people out there who are going to be doing the important work that needs to get done in the next generation. So yeah, I have heard about it. I think it's just really terrible and awful. And I hope that the perception of that, and with education and more of us talking about it and being honest about it, that just doesn't happen anymore in the future.
Yeah, so I just want to give a little anecdote. At one of the first jobs that I have, and this was when my kids were very young, and I don't know if it was me who had taken a sick day or somebody else, but one of our coworkers who was young and didn't have any children said, it's not fair for the people who don't have children. We don't get to take sick days. I just thought that was very funny, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think those are exactly the kind of comments that this reader was referring to. So it looks like, I think we're right on the hour, so we'll go ahead and wrap up, and we just got some final comments from our audience, thanking the panelists for their great perspectives. So again, thank you all so much. Congratulations on your RadXS wins. Thank you, Cheryl, for helping me moderate today, and SIIM. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and happy holidays.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you, Amber.
Thanks so much.